depending, I don't know. Yes, before we start, I want to seek your consent to let you know that this meeting is going to be recorded. So if you have any concern about that, we will want you to indicate. But if we are all okay with that, we can go ahead and start the recording. But if you have any concern concerning recording this meeting, please, you can indicate before we move forward. All right, great. I take this silence to mean that it is consent that we can go ahead. So my technical team, you can go ahead and start the recording. So once more, I welcome each and every one of you to this section. This is a stakeholder round, like we know it's a roundtable where we are all going to be looking at the issue of internet fragmentation and how it impacts human rights and how it manifests in Africa. So today, we are going to be having 4 panelists who are going to lead the conversation by making presentations and answering some of the questions we are going to raise, after which we are going to throw the floor open for people to make input. What we are looking forward to in this meeting is just for each and every one of us to share our ideas. How do you see from the part of Africa where you are? How do you see internet fragmentation? And from those things and from those views, we are also going to look at it to find out the challenges, the impacts. What are we going to do as Africans to be able to chart a course, which means we are going to be leaving this meeting with recommendations on what we expect from major actors. Is it people from the government? Is it from the civil society? Is it from the academia? Is it from other policymakers? We are going to look at the challenges based on the sectors or the actors who are making them, and then make recommendations on what we should do to be able to counter this menace. So to lead this conversation and to moderate it today is my friend and colleague from KICTANet, and I used to call him my counsel. So he's a lawyer and he's a senior partner at KICTANet. So I want to hand over to Mr. Victor Capillo to stay the course of this meeting. Mr. Victor, over to you.
Good afternoon, Boy. Good afternoon, Ihueze. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining. Today we are pleased to have this conversation, as Ihueze has already described. We're going to focus on internet fragmentation, and to help us demystify this very important topic, we have a very unique set of speakers who have different backgrounds and skills and expertise in different areas. So the eminent personnel are, we'll have Bobo Chen, who is the Senior Director at the NGTLD program at ICANN. We also have Francis Manin, the President of ISOC Ghana chapter, and also Benjamin Akinmoyeje, the Chair of the NCC. He's based in Namibia. And last but not least, Lilian Alwoga from CIPESA. So it was maybe you have the technical team upgrade, Bob, to
Is that
speaker? Yes.
Okay. We sent him an okay, let me see him. Is he in the room?
He's on the queue, yes.
Oh.
Okay. Yes, so perhaps I want to start with you, Francis. We have those questions. So from your perspective, what is internet fragmentation from where you work, and how are you seeing it manifesting in Africa, and what are some of the challenges you can see or trends with regards to internet fragmentation?
All right, thank you so much, Victor, and good afternoon, good morning to everyone here. All right, so as you rightly mentioned, my name is Francis Akwa Ameni, President of the Internet Society Ghana chapter, and I'm very glad to see my senior members on the same panel with me here today. I would share my viewpoints and my thought on what fragmentation really means from the scope of Africa with narrowing down to Ghana perspective. All right, so looking at fragmentation, it is from the ISO perspective, because internet society, we believe in, we champion the internet should be open, secured, and globally connected. So fragmentation is basically something that hinders the internet from achieving its basic fundamental principles, because the internet that we came to meet, the internet that was created in the early 60s, that became popular in Africa in the 90s, we knew the internet should be open, secured, and globally connected. So these are the basic fundamental principles of the internet, which we've been championing, and we hold in high esteem. But over time, through technological advancement and revolution, we've noticed there are various factors which is hindering the internet and making it not very accessible and open, which is due to various factors, which we're going to discuss here today. So, and as I mentioned earlier, internet from the onset, we wanted it to be open, borderless. As Africans, we're looking at a borderless internet. You should be able to have free transaction, free access or flow of internet, regardless of your geographical location. But we've noticed over time, due to, it could be policy or regulatory approach, probably by government or some stakeholders, it is affecting the free flow of the internet. What are some of these? Some could be not just intentional, some are unintentional, because as internet grow, because currently people are talking about privacy, and we are talking about data protection. So in effort to make people internet secure and protect people's privacy, policymakers end up making certain rules and regulations which rather unintentionally affect the internet in a negative way. So at times, fragmentation, at times, it's a two-edged sword. If you're not very careful and you deal with it and you're not careful, you think people normally do it on purpose, you get it wrong. Because some rules are just meant, because of the growing needs of the internet, things tend to adjust and change. So when policies are trying to be made to fix those problems, it ends up making the internet fragmented. What are some of these rules? Now, most countries are championing local content, localization of data. And we are championing linguistic, probably. And my background with the CCTOD, a country code domain name, I may want to champion an IDN, which I would want to promote local content of various languages in my country, like the .gh, in a local dialect. That would mean people from other African countries may not be able to benefit from those contents. In the long run, it tends to a fragmented internet. And every region or every country has various levels of priority when it comes to investment into infrastructure. The level of commitment in infrastructure in Ghana may vary from that of Kenya, that of Nigeria. So levels of infrastructure investment also affect fragmentation to an extent. Again, level of technical readiness, because we have various technical readiness level and technical expertise to manage and even make the internet very secure and even open. And we can also talk about the quality of internet across Africa. So these are some of the factors that at times unintentionally make the internet fragmented. And at times, we would say it's some are due to government, some are due to stakeholder. And I think at this point, we should be looking at a PPP approach, private partnership. In the sense that if I believe we have a lot of people who are engaged in NIR's National Regional Internet Governance Forums here. And the question is, do we engage governments or policymakers on the outcomes of our various NIRs? Because it's the government or the policymakers who make the rules. And I'm very glad Africa has introduced the African Parliamentary Network, which in a way is grooming the parliamentarians on how to understand the internet and how it works. That in turn, they're going to make policies that may positively affect it, but not affect it negatively. So me, I think wrapping up on my first submission, I think yes, a multi-stakeholder approach should be adopted. Private sectors, CSOs, technical community, let's engage the government at various levels, because a lot of time technical community meets and we don't invite the government, we don't invite the policymakers, and we intend to make decisions which they are not even aware, and they will make policies and come to affect us. Again, we know when you're making policy changes, meetings like IETF, IEEE, ICANN, we know policies and regulations of the internet are very keen and very critical. So when you're making such policies, we should take our time and take certain factors into consideration before we make such policy, before it affects the internet negatively. So to end with my first submission, I think fragmentation, as I mentioned, some are done unintendedly because just to promote local content or just to protect the right of people. But on the other hand, it affects or make the internet fragmented. So I will end my first submission here and continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francis. Those are very useful suggestions. I recognize the aspect that there are some practices which can be intended and unintended, and also there are aspects around the rules around various aspects such as content and localization that can have an impact on fragmentation in the continent. I'd like to turn to you, Benjamin. Maybe from your perspective, what is your definition of internet fragmentation, and how are you seeing it manifesting in the continent? And are there any challenges or positive practices that you're seeing from where you sit?
Thank you. I hope you can see my screen. Sorry,
yes, I can see you.
I'm running a training at the same time. My internet wanted to fragment. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Benjamin Akimoeje, and it's a pleasure to be here. And I'm going to be speaking in my personal capacity. Although I'm currently the chair of non-commercial user constituency in the ICANN ecosystem multi-stakeholder arrangement. But today I'm just speaking as Benjamin, as a PhD student, and someone who also has embraced this topic. Just as the previous speaker spoke, I totally agree with him to a certain degree that there's a lot of confusion around this whole concept about fragmentation. But I think what is beginning to get attention in the internet governance space is from the basis of political endeavors, especially nation states. And Africans, in fact, what got me involved in internet governance is the experience I had with internet in different countries. And I will bring that back home right now, but let me just say, practical example, I noticed that when I travel to places like Germany, my internet experience is totally different from what I see when I'm in Nigeria. And I used to work for an organization, and the first time we noticed it was we had a service that was based outside of Canada, but then we keep increasing our bandwidth, but at some time we can't get access to these domains or websites. And we're saying, what's wrong? We paid more for bandwidth and all of that. And then we begin to see that because of where our request is coming from, we couldn't access some certain things. So that means that the internet wasn't one. Our requests were treated based on where it's coming from. So I started noticing that there were some sites I could access depending on which country I was in. So it became clear to me that all animals weren't the same on the internet, depending on where you're based. So that's established. But so over time, there's been this whole argument that, so where I sit is, this kind of experience, does it limit freedom of expression, or does it limit access to content? Does it give me another experience that other people get better than me on internet? And if that's the case, then it's violating human rights, since we now know that internet is pretty much a human right. So what have we been experiencing on the continent? There's been a lot of push for privacy, localization of data has been said, and all of that. And if we see from the technical perspective, the internet does not necessarily require jurisdiction, nation state, and things like that. So that's the technical understanding. As someone who has practiced as an IT person over time, you know that these things, data can move, bits can move from different parts to the other. But I think for economic interest and all of that, people have decided to say, okay, you know what? They are trying to govern the digital space the same way they govern the physical space. And for that reason, there have been different barriers. Oh, sorry about my camera. My camera is sick now, so we need to turn it off. So because of that, there are different things. And most of these things have been pretty much influenced by political ideology or political interest. We know that at some point, Russia said it was going to build its own internet. China has its kind of own internet of some sort that limits people. And it seems like a good example. Some African countries are trying to copy it. But what is most important for me and where I sit is, how does this affect our rights, our human rights? Does it limit what I have access to? Does it limit the value I get out of the internet? Does it limit how I'm able to express myself? And so that's one thing that I want everybody to note. But there are other things that cause some form of fragmentation. For example, if you shut down the internet at some point, you fragmented it in one way or the other. That is because at that point, either partially or fully, people cannot get access to the internet. And at that point in time, the internet is not all for the people that were shut down. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying. So that kind of experience. For other people also, if their language barrier, for example, or there are ways these things, for example, I also believe in this ideology about giving everybody, not having the internet as a tool of cultural dominance. So if consistently what we see online is dominated by some nation state or some space, some culture around the world, other people are silenced. So they are not getting a global internet that express their value system and all of that. So for example, in Africa, what I think we shouldn't embrace is this concept where everybody is demanding for internet that is just localized to their own country, and they are looking at the internet as if it's nation state approach, and they keep demanding, like, why are we seeing this? We only want local content and all of that. It defeats the whole essence of internet. It stops people from going across border to see what is possible or what they can do or the potential they can achieve. And these are the things, for me, fragmentation technically might not be possible, However, nation state, because of the ideology of states, governance, and all of that, might force some form of partial fragmentation. We still are not seeing it at higher level, but it's happening in one way or the other, that people are trying to pass laws and all of that. But technically, occasionally there will be some form of fragmentation, but the world just needs to agree on what is fragmentation. Like when the fiber optic cables are cut, that's some technical fragmentation at some point in time. But I mean, we know it's accidents and all of that, but that's fragmentation that just happened right there. But I don't think that's what we're talking about. But it's also, but outside of that, most times we have different levels of networks. But if it's the internet, the one we have, people are trying to undermine it by creating nation states, sovereignty in their local regions. And I don't think it's something good that Africans should embrace, because it violates our human rights, freedom of expression, ability to reach everybody we want to connect to, and all of that. So in terms of Africa, or in terms of the world, I think we should just advocate for one internet, so that we are not I don't know how the word to use now, English is failing me, where we're not maligned or stigmatized by where our request is coming from. We should have equal experience of the internet across the world. That's what I would say. Irrespective of where you are situated in the world, you should have the same type of internet across the world. So that's my submission right now. Any fragmentation that will affect human rights, I don't think it's fair, and I think we should kick against it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. That was very interesting, highlighting the political dimensions, the cultural dimensions, and also the human rights dimensions of what fragmentation is and how it is taking shape in the continent. I'd like to bring in now Lillian from CIPESA, and then we'll have Bob after. So Lillian, from your perspective, you work on both technical policy and human rights. So, what is your definition and how are you seeing internet fragmentation in the continent? Are there any
Hi, Victor. Victor, am I audible? Seem to have a freeze screen.
Yeah, you're audible. He's the one who is frozen.
Okay, great. I think we are just experiencing one of the many cases of fragmentation. And we can all understand what's happening, in Kenya currently. So that is one thing that probably I would be able to highlight and talk about. I'm happy to be part of this conversation. Of course, when we talk about internet fragmentation, just like the previous two panelists have mentioned, there are different aspects, or angles to that. And these have been well documented by the Internet Society, by other actors. And to me, I can understand it as, unique ways in which different countries or governments or regions or, companies are implementing, whether it's regulations or restrictions to access internet. This can be either from a technical, aspect, where we have, I think, Bob, who talks so much about the technical angle, because that is where he's, that is his specialty. But we also have political and, commercial factors that, lead to, fragmentation. And in any case, whichever unique angle or whichever aspect, the different actor takes, this imposes a risk to the free flow of information, across regions, whether it is across different geographical borders and across, different platforms. So what we have seen is, my understanding is we have seen technical, driven fragmentations that are being driven by political decisions. In this case, the most prominent that we are witnessing are the network disruptions. Right now, in East Africa, I mean, Kenyans can attest to this for the first time, we've had a disruption that has impacted not just one country, but all countries within East Africa. Yesterday, we were working and we just could not understand what's going on. Personally, at office, I thought probably my internet had been disconnected, tried to check whether payments had been made, and it turned out payments had been made. Later on, did we get to see, trying to assess, to find out where the problem would be, that our service provider, which is Liquid, for my personal internet, had sent out a notification saying that they were experiencing some, disruptions. Actually, they had sent a warning the day before. So with everything that was building, mobile internet was also being affected, MTN and the like. So we just got to find out that this is an issue that is not just happening in one country, but just because of what was happening in Kenya, it has gone on to span across the region in Uganda, Rwanda, Tanzania. And this goes to show you how political decisions kind of, lead into technical decisions. I think Internet Society has issued a deeper analysis. There have been stakeholders that have issued a call to, having internet restricted, internet restored, not, tampered with. Space has been part of that paradigm, KICTANet, Internet Society, and everyone. So we are sending this kind of, disruptions, and these disruptions, whether it is an internet shutdown that is on a nationwide, like what is happening currently in Sudan and in Ethiopia, because these are the most, these are the two countries that are having an active shutdown for as long as we can recall. These are the kind of, fragmentations that we are seeing, that other people are able to access internet. We've seen providers like Starlink coming in to be saviors, of the day in countries like, say, Sudan. I've seen also some few, like on social media, seeing some tweets from Kenya on how people, were kind of using Starlink to be able to access. So this kind of disruptions, this is what, when we talk about internet fragmentation, that we should all be able to openly access the internet. It not be just, restricting to certain, aspects, or giving access to, having power, by, say, whether it's government, just coming in and deciding when to switch on or switch off. The other aspect I think that has been touched about has been the data localization, which is limiting free flow of information across borders. I'll not really dwell so much into that, but we know if there's we've seen quite a number of countries within the region, meaning Africa, coming up, with data localization laws. And again, here is where we are seeing political decisions influencing regulation. So data localization laws are trying to limit, free flow of data across borders. So some of these laws on data localization are being enacted within the data protection laws, and they require that data is stored locally and, forbidding cross-border transfers of personal data unless authorized by, data protection, authorities or entities. We've also seen aspects where well-defined policies, like, say, cyber security policies, we are seeing that states are sneaking in aspects that could further fragment, the internet. For instance, sometime in 2021, there was a law that was being pushed from, I think, Mauritius about encryption. And there was a proposal to use a proxy server to intercept individual social media content. And again, when you go into these technical issues, I'm not really that much technical, but from a policy perspective, this kind of, restriction could easily break the free flow of traffic, which indeed was a clear, threat to the global nature or the open global, aspect of the internet. So we are seeing those kind of, issues when it comes to fragmentation. And I think the other aspect that I would talk about is blocking social media. For instance, right now in Uganda, we still have Facebook still not accessed widely. It is blocked. It can only be accessed by a VPN. Again, it is kind of interesting that if you don't have a VPN, you're not able to access this aspect of the internet. That is a fragmentation, because there are things that people would not have access to this particular, applications. They are cut away from that part of the internet, that they do not experience the same internet where you and me can rightly go to, Facebook and do whichever aspects that we would want to do, whether it is communicating with friends. Case in scenario right now with what is happening in Nairobi, just imagine if it was happening in Uganda, which has happened before, would not be able, for people who are using this kind of platform, whether it is Facebook, they will not be able to communicate, know what is happening. Should we go here? Is there a tear gas here? What's happening? So there are those kind of fragmentation that we are seeing in the region that I think could demand further, rightful, policy, aspect to it, but also other stakeholders to come in and see how we can ensure that we have an open and global internet, which is unrestricted, no matter what. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lillian. That's very interesting and very useful contributions. I think here, now that you mentioned the Kenyan example, we have always been bragging that there can never be an internet shutdown in Kenya. And, people were saying, one day you'll test it, and we said never. But the day finally came, and we now have first-hand experience in what it means when you really, really want to be on Twitter and you can't access it. And when you really, really want to see send a message online on WhatsApp or Signal, and the messages are just not going. And the fact that the previous day, the Communication Authority promised they are not going to interfere with the internet, and then suddenly they interfere. And then everybody says it's a fiber cut. All the telcos say it's a fiber cut, but they fixed the fiber cut in 3 hours. Yet 2 weeks ago, when we really had a fiber cut, it took almost 3 days to find the situation. So I think it's something that is important to note. So I just want to move on to the other panelists. Bob, I don't know if you're online now.
Yes, I should be.
Okay, we can hear you. Thank you very much for making the time to join. I hope you've be able to catch the drift of the previous presentation. So you work at ICANN. From your perspective, how do you see or define internet fragmentation? How are you seeing it manifesting in the continent? Are there any challenges that you're seeing, or any positive trends that are worth noting that you'd like to share? Over to you.
Okay, I do hope you can hear me. And of course, we have been having quite a bit of a challenge in Nairobi, obviously. So when some of us freeze, as I call Victor here, Sirikal, which translates to government for those of you who understand that language. So sometimes we suffer fragmentation or outage of whatever nature, courtesy of our respective Sirikals. But I'll get back to that. So thank you very much. And first of all, I want to agree very largely, with the speakers that have already touched quite extensively on this topic, and I think they're spot on. And there are very many lenses through which you can look at this topic. So thank you for pointing those out. At ICANN, our motto, for example, and most of you here are very familiar with ICANN, is one world, one internet. So you could actually say that, from where ICANN is positioned, vision would be, one global network that connects everyone, meaning it is borderless, it is secure, it is open, it is freely accessible, it is safe. And, you could actually argue that anything that prevents either you as an individual or you as industry or you as a government from accessing that, this open, borderless, secure, global network is a sign of fragmentation. And, therein lies very many things that could happen. In fact, in 2014, ICANN published a report that it had commissioned, the BCG group to study on what they call greasing the digital economy. And essentially what this report came back with is, the 4 different areas that can actually heavily impact your experience of the internet, or can make you experience fragmentation. And therefore, you ask about, what is the definition of fragmentation? For me, anything that comes between me and one world, one internet, for whatever reason, for whatever manner, in whatever nature, is a sense of fragmentation. So it could be that I am not able to access the kind of content that I'm looking for, that I'm not able to access the kind of speed that I'm looking for, probably because of where I stay or where I work, probably pointing out to infrastructure or a policy decision. That is fragmentation, and it can originate from 4 broad areas. So I would like to characterize it in what this report of the BCG identified. You have infrastructure-related fragmentation, which is essentially the kind of fragmentation that reduces opportunities that allow you to access the internet. And infrastructure is big. Actually, it is 3/4. Sometimes the underlying issue, depending on geography, depending on where you are, depending on devices that you have, infrastructure has been and remains to be a huge factor. And obviously, it can also be very costly. So that's why it continues to be such a huge factor. People long for a time when you can plug in, just like you plug in, your power socket or power cord or power adapter to a wall anywhere. And as long as it can get into that socket, there's electricity. Imagine if that was the case with internet, that regardless of which country, regardless of where you are, you could plug in the way you plug into a power port, and there you are, you have internet. Probably that would be, the future to be. So infrastructure is a huge contributor for a variety of reasons, policy included, intended and unintended, as has been said by Benjamin and others. Then there are those factors that affect industry, that keep companies and organizations from adopting the internet, including, privacy concerns or actually laws that, legislate in terms of to what extent can they go online. And you can also look in this particular case as government, as industry, because, government, as far as, as long as it is government, it is also very many things. It is also the biggest consumer in any economy. It is also sometimes the biggest service provider in any economy. So government comes into different trances. It serves us, it consumes from us, but it also legislates or governs or, responsible for policy. So depending on which lens you look at it, there are industry-specific issues that bring fragmentation or enhance fragmentation or reduce fragmentation. And then the same applies to you and me as an individual. It could be the cost of getting access. It could be policies that target individuals. It could be policies that govern a group or a section of citizenry or a particular country. As long as it then comes between me and one world and one internet, that is a cost of fragmentation. The last item is on information. I might not be online because I don't know, or because I'm not able to interact with the online infrastructure. I can't read the content that is available. I can't use the devices that are available to me, or probably I am challenged, in one way or another, and I am not facilitated, or industry has not thought about that kind of aspect of inability. If I cannot see, for example, how can I get online? Does the industry think about that? Does policy think about that? So even that, even though is not my making, but because it hinders my access to the internet for one reason or another, I am fragmented. I cannot reach, or I cannot use or utilize this network, or I cannot consume it in the way that a normal individual would do. And that becomes a source of fragmentation for me. So information needs is another critical factor. The internet is heavily English. And this is one of the reasons why, for example, at ICANN, there is a huge drive to ensure that that can change. If you look at languages by weight, English is not the biggest language globally, but it is the language of the internet. But it doesn't need to be the language of the internet. And how can we, together ensure that we contribute to making that aspect of information hurdle lesson, so that if I can only speak in Chinese or which other language, I can still consume the internet and get the content that I need in a way that I can access it and read it in the devices that I do have. So infrastructure, individual specific fragmentation challenges, industry specific fragmentation challenges, and information specific fragmentation challenges, all together are the basis of internet fragmentation. So this is how we want to look at it. And thank you once again, Victor.
Thank you, Bob. That almost felt like a masterclass. But I really appreciate pointing out those 4 areas and, highlighting the impact of infrastructure. Because also we all know that across the continent, I think Africa is still lagging behind in internet access and connectivity, which is something that we need to see how to build and work on as something that is, a priority issue. So I like to continue the conversation as we have. So just polite request that anybody who has a question, maybe you can type them in the Q&A for now. Then we'll open it up for questions. And if there are any comments, I can see. Thank you very much. All those who have introduced themselves in the chat section. I hope this conversation is useful. I can see comments there. Maybe for now we can take the question, then we'll come back to the panelists. What's the name is? Trying to find you in there. Who do you have other question? We have Belaid Noah. Maybe you can make your comment or question. You can unmute yourself. Yeah, please go ahead. Okay, I can't seem to hear Belay, but I think he has a long comment which we can all go through. But I'd like to come back to you, Francis. What are some of the best practices or recommendations? We've seen what the problem is. We've seen how it is manifesting itself. So what can we do to address the state of affairs in terms of any best practice or recommendations for specific groups so that you think would be useful in addressing the challenge that you have? Francis?
Yeah, sorry, thank you. All right, so okay, so my recommendation, I would break them into 3 layers. I will look at governance and coordination. I will look at the technical, and I'll look at the user bits. Because if you look at the internet in terms of fragmentation, these are the first categories which we usually, so for the user, I think the user should be given free and equal access to every platform, irrespective of the location. And currently in Africa, I'm happy of the work African Continental Free Trade Area AfTA is doing, and I think is one way we can also channel the use of internet, and because they are making very good progress in trade, and I think is one aspect we can also channel the use of internet so that we'll have a borderless internet within Africa. And currently, I believe Smart Africa is also doing very good work across Africa. They are doing some great work in Ghana, Kenya, and I know some African countries. And we can through their work make sure this because through their work we'll be able to get internet across Africa, which is very borderless. And so, and the key issue has to do with government, because normally when dealing with government, they are the policymakers. I saw Ghana has, in several levels, engaged government and, let me say, the security personnel. Usually, we will want to promote privacy and data protection on the internet, but they also want to defend national security and surveillance. We've had several roundtable meetings, which we had a debate where we the technical and private sector, we saw with privacy on the internet is very paramount, but the government and security sector also for surveillance, because the government set an example that there was a time in Ghana, people wanted to demonstrate, and they were using a hashtag on Twitter to mobilize people to gather at a particular place. So they're trying to make a case, okay, so in such instance, don't they have the right to block that social media platform for that moment, so that to avoid that occurrence? And we said no, because probably at that point in time, someone is also using that platform for something important, and certainly also have free access to use that platform. So there's been that debate and on equal understanding about the usage of privacy, censorship, and surveillance. So I think stakeholder engagement is very important key. That's what usually I say. So government or policies should never be made in silos. That's one of my first recommendations. Policies and regulations should never be made in silos. Government should usually engage CSOs and technical committee when you're making such policies, because policies are very important, regulations are very important. Now countries have Cybersecurity Act, they have data protection laws, and without expert input, it ends up making the internet fragmented. So I think the very first key important thing I'll talk about, that policy should never be made in silos. And again, when it comes to the technical community, because as my boss Bob mentioned, doing meetings like I can and Afrinic and those ASN, they are very key internet bodies in the continent, which make very key important policies or decisions. So usually during such meetings, we should take keen interest and carefully analyze policies and RFCs before we pass them. At times, people may have their parochial interests and they may want to push a policy, but at the end, it will tend to affect the good of the internet or affect the fundamental principles of the internet. So technically, the technical community, anytime we want to adopt or make a change in policy, let's take our time to critically assess it and analyze whether it's going to affect the internet that we know, that we came to meet, that it is open, secured, and globally connected. And again, for the user bits, yes, normally, as I mentioned, we talk of data privacy, we talk of security, we talk of easy flow of access of internet. Many a times, fragmentation, let's not forget that people with physical challenge or limited disabilities also have equal access to the internet. But many a time, when we're talking, we tend to forget them because they also have the right to access to internet. So we should invest more in policy or in terms of device and policy-wise, or make some policy exceptions for them, persons who can afford the device. Because if internet is accessible across Africa, and those who can afford it to digital divide, they are left behind. It's also a form of fragmentation. So one, let's invest more into infrastructure. Let's make exemptions for those who are not included, those who are digitally left out. Let's make incentives for them. Because I know countries like Ghana, other African countries normally give digital device to people who can afford it, or those in schools and other places. And I think it's one way to go to be able to promote digital inclusion. Because for Ghana, for instance, we have internet penetration rate of about 68%. And at the remaining people, what are we doing to get them online? So these are some of the projects that we should also get them involved. Those who are, because let's analyze critically. How many websites across Africa are blind compliant? Those who are visually impaired. We do softwares and application, and we don't even involve them. So as we are using technology, because I think the comment by our colleague, I think Ballard, he was talking about some of this fragmentation is due to advancement of technology. So why don't you rather use this new emerging technology to rather solve problem? Because if you are using Bob was talking about language barrier. Okay, why don't you use depend on AI or ChatGPT to translate language so that everyone can have easy access to content online? Because if now we want to make content not English and localize the content, okay, what if I need that particular article or that content which is not in my language? So I would say let's rather adopt and embrace technology so that we can use that to rather champion and make the internet rather free and non-fragmented. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Francis. That was very useful. I think I like the idea of how do we use AI and other new technologies to ensure that the internet is inclusive. I'd like to come to you, Benjamin. From where you sit, what are some of the best practice or recommendation that you'd make to the various stakeholder groups, academia, CSOs, government, private sector, in the technical community to address fragmentation?
Thank you. My camera is behaving. My camera doesn't want you guys to see my face, so I'm going to turn it off.
Yeah, it's giving us disco lights, but it's fine.
Okay. So I think, first of all, Africa must, and as a matter of we must put our money where our mouth is. For those who have been able to do well with technology, we've invested heavily in it. We should also be participants. We should not all just be consumers. So we should invest in infrastructure and things, related issues. Like Bob told us, infrastructure is a critical component of the internet. And we have significant population to bring online. So for that, we can't keep depending in terms of infrastructure and content on external economies or societies or countries. So that's one. So that Internet is about sharing. It's not just about consuming. It's about people put content there, you go there, get it, and all of that. And as more of our lives are coming online, it shouldn't just be about what we consume. It should also contribute to what we're sharing about ourselves so that it can be of use to us. And so that's one. Then the other one, so instead of us jumping on the bandwagon of those who have invested over the years, China has decided to censor, create their own China golden firewall and things like that. And they can choose to cut out of the world, which is some of the things that is even starting this conversation in the first place. This is because they've invested over a long period and it seems like they are self-sustainable in terms of their own content and society and all of that, which we know is heavily censored. But that's not what we want. We want it everybody to have access and all of that. And I doubt even if we have as much access to Chinese content from here, because either by language barrier, we can't access it, or all of that. So that's one. So we need to contribute and have our content there and all of that. The other thing is people need to start changing our government, even individuals, because most of us advocate for some of these policies that our government finally adopts later. It's no longer norm for us to go with the concept of, what's it called, nation states on the internet. We should now have things like transnational governance approaches. We should no longer keep saying, this is my country, or our nation, this is our internet. That's not the concept behind the internet. We should try and have a shift in our mind. I don't have the solution, but as we go to the future, because this is a new phenomenon, this internet is transborder and is all of that. So, and there's more benefit to gain than just staying within the borders and we want only our content in this region. We want, as against contributing much more to the internet so that we can, through economic of scale and all of that. That's one other aspect that I think we should embrace. The other thing is that we should see access to internet in all of this as human rights. We should see it in that way. Just the same way you don't curb or control oxygen across border. That's the same way internet should be. Right to life and all of that. People shouldn't be discriminated because of where they sit and what they try to access. You see things like, this thing is not accessible in your country or in your region. That is not acceptable. The countries doing that or whatever, it should be open to all. You shouldn't, because you stay in a particular country, you can't access a particular content. And a lot of that is being done in many of these developed countries, that you are in a country, you can't access something. And then they have things like right or intellectual properties and things like that. There should be a new model of things. So, but let me bring it back home to Africa, is that even as so African countries should advocate for all of these things to be openly available to all, not for them to start championing or advocating for discriminatory regulations that limit these little things that they have to, or within our country, or you can't access this, or you can't do this. Whereas we should invest and try to bring more value to either our culture or things that we bring online, so that others can access them and it can bring value to us. And we can look for useful ways we can use this for our social economic development. That's what we should advocate for more. And as I said, things that, as Bob has even helped us define, whatever limits anybody from accessing meaningful internet that gives quality value to individual lives, not this internet that violates or undermine our value systems, or just turns us to consumers or depreciate our lives. Not those kind of internet that doesn't give you anything valuable. All it does is distract you. That's not the kind of internet we're looking for. We're looking for genuine internet that add value to you, that gives you a level playing ground, irrespective of where you are based. That's the internet that we want. Anything short of that is internet fragmentation of some sort that tends to limit some people based on where they are coming from, or the kind of language they speak, or the level of financial system run in their own country, or the economic status that they carry. So, and all of this jeopardizes human rights one way or the other. That is the things I'm saying. So African countries, we should understand all of this and counter them, because none of them add to our existence or add value to us. So that's my own recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. That's very useful. You know, I like the part where you say we need a genuine internet that adds value. We also add value to it. And also there's a level playing ground regardless of where people are based. I'll just come to Lillian, but before that, just to seeing the comments and some of the questions, we'll just take them shortly. And thank you for all those who've introduced themselves. Sunny from Nigeria, I see you. Joel from Nairobi, Anvoli from Cote d'Ivoire, Russia from Sudan. I can see Teresa from Zambia, and Khalid from Nigeria. Can see also Jadiel from Benin, Elias from Ghana, and also Umar, who is also based in Nigeria, and everybody else. Welcome. Oh, I can see Jesse from Uganda, and Sylvia from Zimbabwe, Gerard from Burundi, and of course Grace from KICTANet, Karibu Sana. So we seem to have the whole continent represented, or at least a significant portion. So anyway, moving on to you, Lillian, what would you say are some of the best practice that you can propose or recommendations to the key stakeholder groups, whether the academia, CSOs, government, private sector, the technical community, to address internet fragmentation?
Thanks, Victor. I think these have been kind of, mentioned by some of my fellow panelists. But the one thing that probably I can put out is from, say, civil society, away from advocacy, is kind of pointing to having to conduct deeper research and, to understand the issues that when it comes to policy making, we can use to, I don't want to use the word influence, but to kind of push for policymakers when it comes to, say, policy making, to adopt policies that are inclusive, policies that are not going to further fragment the internet. When we look at some of the underlying issues we've talked about, what is driving this fragmentation, you're looking at policies or regulations that are supposed to, work in advancing, the use of internet or the adaptability of the internet. But in many cases, what we are seeing on the continent is we are seeing policies that, much as they do an aspect of advancing this, open, inclusive internet, they are also introducing aspects that are really taking away the enjoyment of what the internet was built for, and that's bringing the fragmentation. So one way would be to conduct deep analysis, not issuing, it is okay for us to issue, statements and all that, but from experience, we've seen that at times when you approach policymaking with concrete evidence of the actual impact of an issue, and in this case, if it is the different types of fragmentations, then policymakers get to understand. But of course, away from that, the internet society has, come with different, a whole dedicated, page and topic research on this issue of internet fragmentation. And they have critical properties, of the internet. There's an internet impact assessment toolkit that I think from us, like say, who are in advocacy, we can take on to, to get to understand the different layers of fragmentation, what it is we can do, where do we start understanding the topic. So I'll post that probably in the chat room for people to look at. But nonetheless, one is the other thing from Africa, we tend not to be deeply involved in, conversations happening globally. I think Benjamin and Bob have talked about, the different, kind of internet that say states like, like say China or Russia or, some of those countries that we, the West, puts the Eastern, let me say in the Eastern region, pushing for certain aspects of the internet. There are these global conversations that at times we do not plug into, and we just have a fraction of, individuals, plugged into these conversations. So one way that can happen would be to encourage participating in these, conversations, putting our issues, our concerns as a continent, what do we understand, when it comes to, fragmentation. One of the key issues I think that has garnered momentum is the disruptions, because they're not just happening in Africa, but they are happening across, different regions, especially, around aspects of, elections and all that. But there are also aspects, I think, from the user, from the user perspective, I think Bob touched on that, fragmentation. If you're to look at things like disinformation, misinformation, I think it creates some sort of fragmentation when it comes to the user experience to using internet, that you may find that the people who are pushing this, they are using particular technology that, gets other people to experience a certain aspect of internet, certain content that does not exist, just to drive an agenda. That cannot be an aspect of, fragmentation. So we need to plug into these conversations, understand how, global conversations, what's happening at the global, how can we as a region, pick on this to kind of, make sure that our policies or the actors, internet actors, whether it is domestic, foreign, or, private sector, are adhering to this. Of course, for private sector is, I speak so much from the privacy, from the policy perspective. Usually private sector in Africa is being driven by political decisions when it comes to, for instance, issues of shutdowns, because these are embedded in the legislations that are already, put down to us, by the state. So again, what we would like to see more from the private sector is to be transparent in how they handle certain decisions when it comes to, aspects of, whether it is technical, we've been given a directive to address a certain issue in a particular manner, whether it is a data flow, issue, whether it is a privacy concern, whether it's a crime, issue. How do they go ahead to address, those different pockets of fragmentation? So we would like to see more transparency by private sector. In this case, private sector, we are looking at big tech, we're looking at telecoms, we're looking at, ISPs. How do they go about, in addressing some of these pockets of fragmentation, so that we as users are able to understand how they operate and how, aspects of, our data, all our user, information is being handled. But overall, one thing that probably is a cross-cutting issue, I think Francis mentioned on the issue of strengthening and committing to preserving the multi-stakeholder, model of the internet. Currently, there are global conversations for those who are involved in, say, internet governance conversations. There's the WSIS +20 review coming up. We have the Global Digital Compact. All these are talking about, how can we have, this model of the internet, work for everyone. So what I would like to propose to all the different, stakeholders is to come up with commitments. Commitments come with practice. How do you handle these issues? When you're invited to conversations, are you comfortable with just, for instance, private sector and government just speaking to each other, or can we bring different, stakeholder representatives in this conversation? So overall, in general, I would commit to that. With the overall is to all stakeholders to committing to preserving and strengthening the multi-stakeholder model of the internet, because we experience internet has done it for us. If it wasn't for the internet, we would not be on the call today. If, for instance, today there were still further network disruptions and there was a commitment, someone had given a directive, switch it on or trot it, we'll not be having this conversation. And on that KICTANet, I send my deep sympathies for the, canceling or postponing the National Internet Governance Forum because of what is happening. And these are aspects of, the wider impact when we do not look at issues like this, and bring them to conversation, or maybe at the forefront to the different stakeholders, that how their actions can impact, other efforts by, by other bodies or stakeholders. Because I can imagine there's been lots of commitment from partners. There's a lot of, economic interest, social justice interests, and all these interests are being constrained just because of one mistake that two actors have taken, have decided to undertake. I'll pause there for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lillian. That's a very interesting proposals and very useful. I think we still need the internet, and strengthening that multi-stakeholder model, I think, remains very important, and also important for Africans to have their voices heard. I can see there are a number of questions. I think coming to you, Bob, then we'll have maybe we have the panelists then look at them. We'll have run through the questions and then see who want to respond to each. But if you have a question, please put them in the Q&A box. So for Bob, what are some of the best practice or recommendations that you'd like to make to key stakeholders, such as academia, CSOs, government, private sector, and the technical community?
Yeah, thanks, Victor. I think my colleagues have already really talked around quite a bit on some of these recommendations. Probably I'll just add a little bit so that we try and spend some time on the question. But I think I wanted to add two things, and then I look at recommendations around, the four areas that I had highlighted. One other thing I wanted to, to really try and be proactive, especially from this part of the world, which we sometimes refer to variously as underserved or developing or underdeveloped, whichever is a convenient term, but, you can always place or you'll understand which part of the world someone is talking about, even though I think we struggle to agree on the definition of what underserved should be. I think we should be open to embrace new technology because we are we are joining this digital space at a different time. Countries that, have been hugely connected by broadband today, they are using or started different technologies, and they got to a significant critical mass using a different technology. Now, I think looking at Africa specifically, we should be alive and probably be more proactive and embrace new technologies, even technology that is being tested. And I'm encouraged when I see, community networks coming up. They're actually filling a gap that no one wants to go to. Players want to be profitable in this particular industry. And if for one reason or another, where you stay, which is not your fault, probably you're a taxpayer in, this part of Africa, you really still deserve to be connected. But if you don't make economic sense for the private sector who use this as one of the important bases for investing in connectivity or in network or infrastructure in a particular region, then you remain fragmented. You are offline. So some of the ways to go around that, and I'm very happy with some of our regulators that have now made it possible for community networks to thrive, because there is a clear need. And you and me know that this was not the case a few years ago. And I think the countries and, and this has been a huge success out of, multi-stakeholder discussions. People have taken discussions with governments, with regulators, and have convinced them. And in turn, governments have, seen the sense. So in some kind, I think it demonstrates the power of multi-stakeholder discussions. And maybe it gives us hope that, government or policymakers can actually listen, if we can if we are able to demonstrate and convince them. And so therefore, how powerful are we in our, drive and conviction to bring the rest of the stakeholders on board with our ideas so that, we can see progress. So embracing new technologies, and it doesn't come by chance. Someone has to, it takes time, it takes effort, someone has to really engage the other side for them to see the sense. Even though the interest is the same, that same government also would like to see this kind of the world or that part of the world connected. But they have never, experienced the kind of technology that you are suggesting. So how do you make that happen for internet to win, to lessen fragmentation? I think there's also, we are in the era of privacy. So someone said that Europe has come up with a gold standard for data protection. And in the wake of GDPR, as we all know, we have seen a race towards legislating privacy in whatever flavors. And of course, it has its own merits, very rightly so. But we have each of these pieces of legislation, be they already enacted or bills that are in the pipeline, to what extent have they really, really, really looked at their context to ensure that that bill or that act responds and is progressive enough to actually make them grow? Are they gaggling? Are they frustrating? Are they hindering what could actually, thrive and create a much bigger market? There is a clear case for open data. And, where data can be accessed in a safe and secure manner and used, within the confines of the law, industry thrives, entrepreneurship thrives, because the internet is a marketplace. It is a business. And some of the things that will drive industry to embrace it is when they see value and potential and revenue from it. And so how do you, demonstrate this capacity of the internet into a region or a part of the world that feels that it is only, a market for the global north or for big tech? How do you demonstrate that an SME or, a small player, a small entrepreneur can actually start off and thrive on the internet and hence draw an entire ecosystem with them and let them join online? Some of this actually is lies in the ease of accessing data. And this is where there is, a lot of challenge. And, depending on who you speak to or which lens you're wearing, the question of privacy is huge. But you can do very little without data, very little without data. So how do we balance so that this makes sense for business? Because at the end of the day, when industry has embraced technology, then they have the power to invest, including back in that technology. And by the way, even technology needs a thriving offline infrastructure. If you order something online, potentially you might need someone to literally transport it offline to your place. So you have a parallel, offline infrastructure that is supported by technology that really benefits, a much broader ecosystem. So it is very important to outline and underscore, all these factors. And sometimes the missing link is probably just data, to actually unlock a clear, huge potential of the internet, because the internet is a business. So with that, I think very quickly, these are some of the things that, looked at from an infrastructure perspective, from an industry perspective, from an individual perspective, or from an information needs perspective, should guide how we do approach our engagement with the internet. But I'm happy to look at the specific questions looking at our time. And thank you, Victor.
Thank you very much, Bob. Now I want to open the floor. Thank you for highlighting that very important fact of how states are legislating, and also community networks. KICTANet has been working on promoting community networks across Africa, and like the fact that is plugging a gap where service providers are not interested and can help in expanding connectivity to those so-called underserved areas, and of course the issues around platformization. Are we just a market for big tech? I think something that we all need to consider. What we want our future to be moving forward, that we are platformers or we are just platformed, or how do we get out of that bubble and enjoy the full benefits of the internet and spread that message to everybody. So thank you very much for those useful comments and recommendations. In terms of question, I see whether you have your hand up.
Yes, I will want my colleague Gucci to read out the question that is in French, so that since most of our panelists are English speakers.
Super.
Okay. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, Avis is... Am I reading out the question?
Yes, please.
Rephrase our question.
You can read it in French first and then read it in English.
Okay, in French. Bonjour à tout le panel, Avis du Cameroun. S'il vous plaît, dans quel cadre pouvez-vous nous classer les accidents dus au coupure de la fibre? Et aussi les vandalismes fréquents observés sur la fibre optique des secteurs qui créent des ruptures d'approvisionnement d'Internet. Pouvez-nous parler de fragmentation dans ces exemples?
Okay, thank you. So an issue about fragmentation. And then there's also another question here for Bob. Would you mind going through those 4 broad areas of internet fragmentation, particularly focusing on the third, on user-related challenges? And then there is another question by Umar. There's proliferation of divergent regulatory frameworks across different regions. How can we deal with or adopt a single approach to counter such challenges? So panelists, I don't know who wants to respond to which comment. And then I think there was also one other question by Sylvia. Will fragmentation ever end, or it's a continuous lost battle? What are your predictions in relation to emerging technologies? Who would like to go first on that? I know there's one question specifically for Bob, and then the rest you can pick and choose, or if you have any additions to any of the questions, please go ahead. Bob, we can start with you since there's a question directly for you.
Yeah, thank you. So in terms of the user-related, fragmentation
Sorry, Bob,
issues.
I can't seem to hear you.
How about the rest? Because I do hear you well, Victor.
Are you able to speak?
Yeah, I hear you. Can anyone else hear me? Yeah, Victor, I think it is you.
Oh, you can hear Bob.
I can hear both of you.
Oh, sorry,
yeah,
sorry,
Victor,
it's my
very
bad,
well.
my bad.
Okay. Yeah, so I think from an individual perspective, so first of all, I spoke about or highlighted, 4 broad areas. That was infrastructure, specific issues, industry-specific issues. And here, we also noted that you can look at government as industry, either as a consumer, to what extent has it embraced, or is it hindering, is it causing fragmentation as a consumer, but also as a provider of services? Then individual focused issues that can actually cause fragmentation, and also information related issues. Yes, I do note that, you can look at fragmentation in terms of people that are only in an exclusive network, the dark web vis-a-vis, the regular internet, which is actually true, different technologies vis-a-vis the internet, which is using, open protocols developed, through open standards under the Internet Engineering Task Force. So, I mean, you can look at fragmentation in very many ways. Really, for me, it is simply not being able to access something. So for either reason or for that particular reason, whatever it is, you are fragmented, you are separated. If you can't access government content because it is in a language you don't understand, it doesn't matter if it is a network that is the same as yours. You are fragmented. If you can't read because of a disability, and the platforms as presented today does not allow you to do that, you could be having devices that are on the same network, on the same protocols, are actually using that network. But because they're not in the format that allows you to actually consume them or use them, then you're fragmented. So you are offline. So that is actually the most localized element, the element that is practical to us, that actually makes sense, because indeed fragmentation is being perpetuated on a daily basis for various number of ways. As an individual, from an individual perspective, there are a number of considerations. First of all, individually, there are beliefs in the safety of your data online, and therefore there are people that choose the level by which they get online, and while others have everything online or are happy to embrace all technologies. Some are quite reserved and probably choose not to be in particular networks, or not to go to particular sites, or not to consume particular technologies, or even particular brands, because of their ideas on personal safety. So those are individual related issues. How about trust in the system, or for example, if it is about e-commerce, you trust the payment systems that are available. You could be having everything, but if you don't trust that system, then you will still actually stay away from as an individual. How about ownership of the tools that you require to engage with the online infrastructure? How accessible are they to you? Can you afford them? Do you have the skills to actually use them? You could also have a user problem. But also, there's also your own interest in and perceptions about embracing technology. So looked at as an individual, if you take 10 people probably different percentages of them will have different levels of trust on the internet, in embracing technology or staying away, different levels of user capacity, different levels of reservations and trust levels. So an individual can depict a variety of aspects that, and depending on where he stays in terms of proactiveness to embrace or being reserved, you have a chance that this person can, to a high degree or a lesser degree, be interested in embracing technology and then stays fragmented from the internet.
Okay, thank you, Bob. There was a question on fiber cuts. I don't know if Lillian, you'd like to respond to that.
Sorry, I think I got I kind of disconnected. I was trying to listen in French, so I didn't get the question.
I think the question was relating to how to classify the accidents that are due to those cuts, due to fiber cuts, or vandalism of fiber connections, fiber cables, which have the effect of disconnecting people from the internet. Whether this also this relating to fragmentation, or are these types of internet fragmentation, if I understand the question correctly?
Right. I'm seeing in the chat, I think someone has already have a recommendation. I think there are genuine cuts that, can be unforeseen. But also there are those kind of disruptions, cable cuts, or I don't really want to call them cable cuts. There are those that are non-foreseen, and these things have happened. I think this year alone, there was a cable cut somewhere in February or March that affected, internet across Africa. I think this one is holding probably, yeah, it was February. Yes, thanks, Bob. There's some bit of accountability that we can hold to the service providers to ensure probably the strength of, the cables and all that. But when it comes to fragmentation, it's more of a deliberate action. A cable cut can be probably made to happen by maybe pirates, if I put it that way, because at times we never get to know what has caused this. So if it is who is driving the cut, if it is a genuine, at times this information is never disclosed. That's why earlier one of the recommendations I put was to have a bit of disclosure. What is happening? Why are we experiencing this kind of, issues or, disruption? But away from that, I think also governments in terms of making policies is to make sure that, they hold the service provider a little bit more accountable in the nature of the, cables they are laying, away from the submarine cables. Some years ago in Uganda, we had an issue on the quality of a fiber, optic cables that were being laid, in the country. And it turned out that we were having cheap, things that could easily be cut, or they were not following particular standards when it came to laying these cables. They were required to follow a particular width, when it came to digging, but some of these cables were being, left on top. And of course, technically, you'll be somewhere there will be a cut, or there will be vandalism and all that. So there are those aspects to that. But when you talk about fragmentation, internet fragmentation is who is driving this? What is the purpose? What is the aim? What is the intended? Are they just, saying that, we want these aspects, we want to have this control. It's about control when it comes to infrastructure, switching on, or, if it is from the technical, we want to be in control of what we have access to, when we see there's an issue, usually we have national security or economic interest issues, then I should be able to control who is accessing and who is not accessing for purposes of my country. So there are those aspects that we need to be mindful about. And yeah, I don't know if that kind of response to Avis's question, but Bob or anyone, Francis or Benjamin can assist in trying to see if Avis' response was covered. I see a +1, so we are good. Thanks.
Thank you. There were also other question, maybe, I don't know, between Francis and Benjamin about new and emerging technologies. So how can we leverage and build local advantage and also de-risk data?
Okay, permit me, Francis, here. This is something that I just like to say, and I'll just frame it around emerging technologies. We've got a lot of universities in Africa, and you see kind of research we're doing, we're just still stuck in the past. Why are we not doing groundbreaking work in such a way that even this emerging technology or new emerging technologies come from us too, that address our realities in the way we want to interface with this current infrastructure space that we find ourselves. Maybe the current ones that we're using, the current one we're using is not as economically favorable to us. Then why can't we design something maybe that is less power consuming, more rugged? Let our research prioritize these things, and I'm speaking from somebody sitting in the university. I mean, you look at all the research we're doing, a lot of time, me inclusive, we're talking about frameworks, we're talking about, we're spending years to just discuss this, whereas we could have spent time, either creating jugal systems that re-engineer the existing systems to fix our realities, and then it starts applying to us, that we look at. We're not present in IETF where people are developing protocols that underlines all of these technologies that we're seeing. Why are there no incentives for undergraduates or researchers on this continent to be working in this area, to just say, what can we do to ensure that the internet we have in the coming years will be maybe 50% local African infrastructure supported, and we're not doing that. So these are some of the things that I've been thinking about as we are even talking, because right now what we do is, and I'm not saying I'm innocent of it too. It's all of us, that why don't we begin to look at things differently? It doesn't matter that we started late or people have gone ahead of us, but if we start today, 50 years time, we'll be somewhere to say, look, this AI, let's not just sit at applying it or using it. How can we make it ours, as against our people are just running all around it, talking about the guidelines, the protection and all of that, as against like, what can we do? Let's leave the guidelines, let's leave the protocols, let's leave the bias, let's create it. How can we own it? That it serves us and it reflects from our own realities. It might not be AI, it might be something else. So that's the way I look at emerging technologies. And what I see us doing half of the time is that we're doing catch up. We're doing, trying to position ourselves in a way that we're just major consumers. And our university is not serving those purposes that are supposed to help us positions us in a way that we can come to the table and negotiate or even insist on ways to be a major player. So what we'll keep doing is to keep adjusting and to keep using, because that's what we can talk as much as we want. Emerging technologies is two ways. We either want to be trained in it, we ask for capacity, train us in this new emerging technology, or we say protect us from the harm that might come from this emerging technology. We've not say, okay, we want to re-engineer it and use it so that it becomes our own. We're not doing that. Neither are we, because we are not in the spaces where these technical things are being discussed, and we have the same theoretical concept and basic principles, but we're not just showing interest in it. So I think there needs to be a paradigm shift in the way we look at these things, and we shouldn't be bothered that people have gone ahead of us. We can catch up as well if we change our mindset. So that's what I would say in terms of when it comes to emerging technology. I don't know if somebody else has any other way beyond we getting license for it or buying it. There's no other thing we're doing right now. That's just what we're doing. The models, the everything, we're not doing, we're just adopting it. There's nothing else we're doing. But our universities, labs and all of that is available for us to start doing these things from, and it requires that we change our mindsets. So if there's any researcher listening to me right now, don't go the easy way of developing a framework or just do something. It might not be popular, but start the research, you know? So that's what I would say. Emerging technology, we're just catching up on it, unfortunately. I'm sorry, I hope that's not a very pathetic way to answer that question. Yeah, thank you.
No, thank you very much, Benjamin. I think that's very useful insight. I think lastly, before we go to the final closing remarks, where I would also like all the speakers to maybe tell us what are their predictions in terms of where do they think the continent is going with respect to, or where would they like the continent to go when it comes to this issue of fragmentation. If you cast your eyes on the horizon, where do you think the continent should go? But before that, and as you answer that, Francis, maybe you can also tell us how respond to Omar's question about the question is, there's a proliferation of divergent regulatory frameworks across the regions. So how can we deal with or adopt a single approach to counter such challenges?
All right, thank you. Well, before I come to that, I want to just respond to bits and pieces of the other questions. I think my colleague Lillian was talking about fiber. Someone asked about if fiber cuts and thefts are also a form of fragmentation. To me, I think it's only to an extent, because fiber cuts, they may be, I would say, disruption of the internet. So it's only to a little extent of fragmentation. It is how fast you're able to recover and come back and restore internet. That is when we may deal with fragmentation. All right, to talk about, and I think someone also asked a question of what fragmentation would it ever stop, or it's a lost battle? I don't think it's a lost battle, but it's not stopping now. It's something, once we want to embrace new and emerging technology, it is something that is going to come up every day. I think the approach one has to do with education, because we as the technical committee and the CEOs will have to educate our fellow Africans, because there are some basic protocols and principles of internet which we need to understand very well. Again, we need to be ready to invest in infrastructure and infrastructure as well, because currently we are pushing for IP version 6, and IP version 6 also comes with other infrastructure investment. So if we are ready to adopt IP version 6 and you're not ready to invest in those infrastructure, that means you'll be left behind. That is another form of fragmentation. So as we are ready to embrace change, we should also be ready to invest. Again, at the future for Africa. May I see, I'll go with what Benjamin really said. We should look at localization or decolonization of the internet to Africa. Because what we've done in the past is we only go for licenses or priority software, which somebody have built, and we acquire licenses to use it. But what are we doing for ourselves as African? Let's develop technology of our own, softwares of our own, so that we can own and manage it ourselves. That is the future, because if we didn't develop those softwares. We only have license to be able to use it. That is where fragmentation comes in, because you don't own it, you don't have a complete right to it. But once we begin as Africans, let's invest more into research, because I don't know how many Africans have a lot of, let me say, research networks in Africa. A country like China, I was in China last year, and China invests so much into research. So I got to China and I was like, I was lost, because I couldn't access my emails, I couldn't access to a lot of information back in Ghana, because they've almost localized everything. Yes, it's a form of fragmentation, but for Africans, what are we doing for ourselves? Are we waiting for people to develop AI so that we go and even rather try to make policies to stagnate it? So the future we are looking for Africa is we should begin to develop research network within Africa, invest into hubs, grow them young, because there are a lot of tech enthusiasts within Africa, but we are not using them. They go outside and they try very well. What are we doing for ourselves? So let's invest into tech education infrastructure. So as the growing needs of tech comes, we are ready to embrace it. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Francis. I don't know, Bob, any closing words in terms of the future?
Yeah, so I think I'll go back to, Victor, something that you mentioned in passing, but I think it's pretty fundamental that, there has to be value that is taking you, or that is making you consume technology. But also you could be outside technology, probably because you don't know. And that speaks to awareness or literacy or information needs. And all these needs to be bridged. And someone has a responsibility, if it is literacy, for example, that is creating a barrier for whatever sectors or corners or parts of, any country. There is need to ensure that barrier is bridged. Actually, the BCG report called it friction. Whatever it is that is causing friction, if it is literacy, if it is infrastructure, if it is individual-related issues, if it is industry-related issues, then they need to be bridged. But we can also show this by demonstrating the potential that we either stand to miss or to gain by embracing technology. Sometimes we realize that we are actually seeking the same thing, but because we don't have the same understanding, so some of us are seen as preventing. If you spoke to any government today, they will tell you how they want to create jobs, for example. But on the other hand, you look at the practices that they have lined up, be they policy, be they whatever nature, how that is actually hindering or curtailing potentials, including online or digital potential, that can actually help them achieve the same job creation that they seek to do. So showcasing how this particular sector, by ensuring that we defragment it as far as possible at an individual level, at industry level, and engaging them to embrace it, so that, as always we say, the biggest consumer, the biggest service provider, they are part and parcel of it. Then we become a common player. When you shut down internet, for example, you realize that, and I think they also realize that not only are US citizens cut off, but they're also cut off. So while you can't communicate, but then they also realize they can also not communicate. So it is an equalizer. And these are some of the things that unites us, so that there is a unity of purpose. So I think what Benjamin says is very important. There's no reason why we are not playing with the current technology. Like, there is no reason. The internet is permissionless. Like, you literally don't need permission to go online or to connect. Literally, it is permissionless. And we do have the capacity to engage at the levels where others are engaging today. And actually, we have an advantage because we have not actually been that connected. So we might actually not have a lot of legacy challenges that other places have. You talk about mobile money, for example. This is why mobile money has been very successful, because probably we don't have credit cards or bank accounts. So we don't actually have a lot of legacy technology. That means we should be very easy to adopt new technologies, which we should actually be supporting ourselves. A good friend of mine that you might know is called Ali Hussein. He always says that if you find yourself in a market and a market has got probably four things. There is a market itself as a platform. There is those who have come to the market to sell. And then there are also those who have come to the market to buy. And then there is things that are being sold, or the product itself. So, you can look at yourself in this market, where you fall. Are you the platform, the market? Are we selling? Are we buyers, or are we actually products? And depending on, where we fall, which I tend to think is on the product side, meaning someone is actually eating a lot of our lunch and dinner, it's a wake-up call that technology has a huge potential to lift us off, in terms of employment, in terms of opportunities that every government wants. And therefore, we should endeavor to move from being the product to the platform, to sellers, and not just buyers and products. Thank you very much, Victor.
Thank you very much, Bob. Those are very wise words. Move from being the product to the buyers of the platform. Lillian, what say you?
What say me is everything has been said. So I don't know if I really have anything valuable to add. But in summary, I think Sylvia has made a comment that in Africa, we have a tendency of just, jumping onto technology. We are not innovative enough. Even when we are innovative, we do not have critical success, in terms of these innovations. So instead of just, running into just jumping into, innovations, we need to have innovations that are driven by ourselves. But most importantly, even that, we should not be caught in battles of the North and the East. In this case, China, Russia, US, Europe. A lot is happening at the global scene. Whereas, yes, it is very important for us to be plugged into those conversations, but we also need to be able to know what do we want as a continent, what is, our context, and how can we benefit from whatever is being proposed, or also just have the guts to say, no, this is not going to work out. This will work out. What is happening in the aspect of the fragmentation space and, where we are seeing the so-called surveillance, adoption of certain laws or, certain aspects, is being driven by, global powers, everyone wanting to take a pie of Africa. So whether it is deploying, infrastructure or driving innovations, there seems to be someone who is driving, but not ourselves. So I think my take on this would be that, yes, let us plug into the conversations, but also let us be able to locally customize and see what works for us and what does not work for us, rather than just jumping into conversations. And of course, literacy for all, whether it is, the big internet players like ICANN or, ISOC or Lafrenic or whatever is, digital literacy is very important. The adoption that we are looking at, the acceptance of, the internet, it all begins with, literacy for all different, stakeholders. So I would put it like that, but I'll still go back to what I said, is to push for the commitment to preserving and strengthening the multi-stakeholder, mode of the internet, because without that, we'll be caught in conversations that we'll not be able to escape from.
Thank you very much, Lillian. That's very insightful. Digital literacy is important. Let us drive our vehicle and go to the destination that we want. I think that's my takeaway there. Last but not least, Benjamin, any words for the future? And then whether you can give us closing remarks.
Thank you. I think it would be good for me to do unashamed advocacy for multi-stakeholder internet governance, because I'm a beneficiary of that. Yeah, I totally align with Lillian on that. And I think that's a place where Africa has, as long as it's multi-stakeholder, we have a level of leverage to say, hey, this is important to us because you want everybody to participate. And so what we just need to do is to be more vocal and bring in principles on the trajectory of human rights, that this resource we've all agreed that is good for everybody. And if it's so, it should be free and open. And we should make sure at this point, we should be loud and aggressive and passionate about that, pending when we too can hold either an economic or technological power. And I think that's going to happen in the future sometime. I just don't know. Maybe it's 200 and something, I don't know. But before then, we should keep advocating for multi-stakeholder engagement, and we should speak powerfully and very vocal in this space. We should also demand for our sovereignty to some level, because we know the way it is right now economically, where all the infrastructure we're just users, it's based in different power blocks. And I agree with Lillian as well that we shouldn't be caught up within this contest between the North and the East and all of that. We should just advocate for human rights-based internet, open and free for all, and that is all-encompassing for multi-stakeholder engagement. That way, we can forge a way forward. And in the process, we should start investing in our own future as well. It's very critical. We should put part of our resources into the infrastructure that will make our society better for the future. We should innovate. Thank you very much. That's what I would say.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. Echoing those very important messages about, especially on the multi-stakeholder approaches, and for us to raise our voice, or voices for that matter, in the spaces where discussions are being held, and to put our case forward so that then the internet remains rights respecting and also open, free for all members of the continent. So that is all for me. I'd like to just thank you all before I hand it over to Weze for the closing remarks on my behalf. I don't know how we can give all these wonderful panelists a clap in the comment section so that they can get all their blessings, but we really do appreciate you taking your time off your very busy schedules to make time for this very important conversation. And, special thanks, Bob from ICANN, Lillian from CPESA, Benjamin, Francis, all of you. We really appreciate you making the time. So as we conclude, I'd like to hand over to Iweze, my brother from another mother.
Thank you so much, Victor.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lillian. It was good seeing your lovely face again. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Francis. Thank you, Bob. It has been a very wonderful time. I know this is 2 hours well spent. So one of the things we all agreed is that most of these things that have been listed today, I'm so glad we always gather to do this. So one thing I kept hearing is taking action. So we should stop making all these things a talk show and move to the point where most of the things that we are outlined today, most of the recommendations that we have made, that in our different roles, in our different organizations, that we find space to make sure that we are actioning them where it is possible. I want to thank everyone, even the audience. I was overwhelmed when I looked at how people joined from across Africa. Like Victor said earlier on, it looked like the entire continent was here this morning, this afternoon, or this evening, no matter where, depending on where you joined from. We want to thank each and every one of you, and we are promising you that all the effort, all the contributions that we have made here today will not be in vain. And before I go, I'm telling you this meeting was recorded. We are going to share a recorded version. We are also, by the time we are done with putting the report and the recommendations together, we are also going to share with us, because what we are looking forward to is to make sure that all these conversations going on are going to come together to bear something that will put Africa to where we want Africa to be. Thank you so much once more. And before we log out, I want to thank KICTANet, our partner, and all the effort putting this together. Thank my team members, the communication team, the technical team from Paradigm Initiative, and everyone here that were working in the background to make this a success. And more especially, we want to thank our partner who helped us to put this together, Global Partner Digitals. So we appreciate you for the effort, for the resources and everything committed into doing this. And we look forward to doing this sometime soon. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.